Have you ever believed you found true love, only to realize the person you married was a complete stranger? Why would a man shower a woman with romance and devotion before the wedding, only to turn cold the moment the vows were spoken? And when silence inside a marriage becomes unbearable, would you risk everything to uncover the truth, even if that truth could destroy your life? In this story, I'll take you through my journey from what seemed like the perfect beginning, to the chilling silence, and then to the shocking discoveries that changed everything. This isn't only about betrayal, it's about uncovering a hidden scheme that turned my entire marriage into a carefully crafted lie. My name is Justine Crawford. I was 27 years old living in Denver, Colorado, when Trevor Caldwell proposed to me last spring. After 8 months of dating, I truly believed I had found my forever. Our wedding day was magical, over 200 guests, a grand ceremony at the Highlands Country Club, and a night filled with laughter and champagne toasts. At that moment, I thought my fairy tale had finally come true. But as you're about to see, even the most picture-perfect beginnings can hide cracks you don't notice until it's too late. Let me take you back to the start, what felt like the perfect beginning. They say your wedding day is the happiest day of your life. For me, it truly felt like stepping into a dream too perfect to be real. I can still smell the roses, hundreds of white blooms arranged around the ballroom, their fragrance so sweet, it clung to the air and to my dress. Soft petals brushed against my shoulders as I walked down the aisle. The grand piano played Clair de Lune, the same piece I used to practice on an old keyboard in my bedroom when I was a teenager dreaming of a day like this. Trevor held my hand so tightly, it was as if he wanted to fuse our lives together in that moment. His palm was warm, steady, his pulse strong. He leaned close and whispered, "We made it." I felt my throat tighten, my eyes blur with tears. All I could think was, I am the luckiest woman alive. There were so many people, over 200 guests crowding the room in gowns and dark suits. My friends from college, my coworkers, Trevor's supposed colleagues, cousins, I hadn't seen in years. The applause rose like thunder as we walked side by side, the sound echoing off the crystal chandeliers. My mother sat in the front row, eyes shining, clutching the lace handkerchief she had carried at her own wedding. I caught her gaze for just a second, and the pride on her face filled me with warmth. The reception felt like something out of a movie. Golden light shimmered off tall champagne flutes, the air buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses. Emily, my maid of honor, hugged me so tightly I almost spilled my drink. "You look like you're living in a fairy tale," she whispered. I laughed because she was right. That's exactly what it felt like. During those 8 months of dating, Trevor had been every bit the gentleman. He walked me home under the Denver streetlights, kissed my forehead goodnight, remembered the little things that most people forget. He always knew how I liked my coffee, how I hated silence when I cooked, how I secretly loved cheesy rom-coms. He painted vivid pictures of our future, a small house with a porch swing, 2 kids chasing each other across the yard, a golden retriever wagging its tail at the front door, and I believed him with my whole heart. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, his green eyes locked onto mine with such intensity that all the doubts my friends had voiced vanished instantly. "Aren't you rushing?" they had asked. "Do you really know him?" But in that moment, none of their words mattered. He looked at me like I was his forever, and I surrendered to that promise without hesitation. I remember the sweetness of the wedding cake, buttercream frosting melting on my tongue as guests laughed around us. I remember the live jazz band filling the night with rhythm as people danced, shoes tapping against the polished floor. I remember Trevor's hand at the small of my back as he guided me through the crowd, steady, protective, like I was the most precious thing he had ever held. At the end of the night, when the music faded and the lights dimmed, Trevor squeezed my hand again. His voice dropped low just for me. "From now on, it's just you and me." I went to bed that night, certain I had found my happily ever after. To me, there were no cracks, no shadows, nothing but light. I couldn't see the storm hiding just beyond the horizon. 6 weeks. That's how long it took for the dream to unravel. Our marriage bed was cold not because of the sheets, but because Trevor never reached for me. On our 6-week anniversary, I slipped into a silk nightgown I had chosen carefully, hoping to spark something between us. He didn't even look up from his phone. "Trevor, we're married," I whispered, trying to sound calm though. My voice trembled. "I'm your wife. Why won't you even hold my hand?" He finally glanced at me, his green eyes no longer warm but sharp with irritation. "My body is my choice. Marriage doesn't give you ownership over it. Respect my boundaries." The words hit like ice water. Boundaries. The man who once kissed me in the middle of crowded streets, who had slipped his arm around me during movies, now spoke to me like I was an intruder. I lay there in silence, staring at the ceiling while he turned his back to me. The sound of his phone tapping filled the room. He laughed at something on the screen, soft, private, and it felt like he was a million miles away. Days turned into weeks, and the distance grew heavier. At breakfast, he stirred his coffee with mechanical precision, barely looking at me. He spent hours on his phone, stepping outside for calls, his voice low and urgent. One morning, I tried again. "Trevor, maybe we should see a marriage counselor. This distance, it isn't healthy." His head snapped up, and for the briefest second, I saw something flash in his eyes. Fear, panic. It vanished quickly, replaced by calm, rehearsed words. "We don't need counseling. We just need time to adjust. 6 weeks is nothing in a lifetime together." His tone was final, like he had practiced it in front of a mirror. My stomach twisted. When I suggested visiting my sister in Phoenix, his reaction was telling. His hand froze halfway to his coffee mug. Then he nodded quickly. "That sounds nice. How long will you be gone?" "Just the weekend," I answered, watching him carefully. "Will you miss me?" He shrugged, eyes still on his phone. "I'll manage." That dismissal should have broken me. Instead, it confirmed what I had begun to suspect. He was relieved whenever I wasn't around. In those moments, I started noticing every little change. The way he flinched when I brushed his arm. The way he smiled only at his phone, never at me. The man I had married, the one who once couldn't stand being apart for even a day, seemed to vanish the second we returned from our honeymoon. I tried to convince myself that marriages go through phases, that maybe stress or exhaustion explained it. But deep inside, a gnawing certainty grew. Something was terribly wrong. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Every couple goes through rough patches, right? But the patterns in Trevor's behavior became too sharp, too deliberate to dismiss. He checked his phone constantly, like a lifeline he couldn't let go. The screen lit up at all hours, and he'd tilt it away whenever I walked into the room. Sometimes he'd step outside, lowering his voice, speaking in tones too tender to be business. One evening, I set dinner on the table, pasta with the homemade sauce he used to say he loved. He didn't even glance at it. Instead, he pushed the noodles around with his fork, eyes glued to his phone. "Long day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Client stuff," he muttered. Then he excused himself, heading to the study. The door clicked shut. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I hadn't heard him laugh with me in weeks. Yet I could hear him laugh on the phone, his voice softer, warmer, more alive than it ever was with me. His routines grew rigid, almost obsessive. He woke up at the exact same time, made the same coffee, stood by the window, scrolling through emails as though he were performing a script. Even his expressions felt rehearsed, the smiles placed at the wrong moments, the sighs a little too dramatic. When I pressed him, the mask slipped. "Trevor, we don't talk anymore." "I don't even know what your days look like," I said one morning. He looked up from his coffee, green eyes flat. "My work is confidential. You know that. But I've never even met your coworkers. Don't they ever invite us anywhere?" His jaw tightened. "I don't mix business with personal life." That's how it has to be." The words sounded memorized as though he'd recited them before. One Saturday, he told me he had a client meeting. I watched him leave in his charcoal suit, crisp and perfect, carrying a leather briefcase. But hours later, when I drove past the supposed office building, his car was nowhere in the lot. I sat there for 20 minutes, scanning every window, but never saw him enter. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that I was paranoid or insecure. But every instinct inside me screamed that my husband was living a life I wasn't part of. The final straw came at breakfast the following week. I suggested we plan a small getaway, maybe the mountains, just the two of us. He barely looked up from his phone. "I'm busy. Maybe later." Busy with what I asked. My voice cracked sharper than I intended. His eyes flashed quick and defensive. "Don't start this again, Justine. You're imagining problems." But I wasn't imagining them. The distance was real. The laughter I overheard through closed doors was real. And the way he seemed almost relieved when I left the house, it was undeniable. Sitting alone at that breakfast table, staring at the untouched plate between us, I realized I couldn't keep ignoring the truth. Trevor's secrecy wasn't random, it was a pattern, and patterns always leave evidence. I had never thought of myself as the kind of woman who snoops. I believed in trust, in giving space, in respecting privacy. But one afternoon, while Trevor was out for another so-called client meeting, my doubts finally outweighed my hesitation. I walked into his home office. The space was spotless, too spotless. Every pen lined up in a neat row, every paper stacked with military precision. His drawers held nothing but office supplies. The filing cabinet contained bland financial statements, all vague and generic. It felt staged, like a set for a play. I almost gave up. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a folded receipt poking out of the trash can. My heart raced as I pulled it free. It was from a flower shop in Las Vegas, dated 3 weeks earlier. A dozen red roses. On the back, written in Trevor's handwriting, was a phone number with a Nevada area code. My stomach dropped. Trevor had told me he was in Salt Lake City that week, attending a financial conference. He had kissed me goodbye, suitcase in hand, and promised to call every night. He never mentioned Las Vegas. I snapped a photo of the receipt with my phone, my hands trembling. The evidence was small, but it was undeniable. He was lying to me. That evening, I couldn't stop replaying the discovery in my mind. When Trevor came home, I studied his face as he walked through the door. His smile rehearsed, his suit jacket draped casually over his arm. He looked like a man returning from an honest day's work. But I knew better. "How was your meeting?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. "Good," he said, dropping his briefcase. "Productive." I nodded, swallowing my anger. Inside, my chest burned with questions I couldn't yet ask. The next day, I decided to take things further. I drove downtown and parked across from the office building where Trevor claimed to work. For an hour, I watched through the glass lobby doors. I saw employees come and go, greeting each other, swiping badges. Not once did I see Trevor. Finally, I walked inside. My heels clicked loudly against the marble floor as I approached the front desk. "Hi," I said, forcing a smile. "Can I speak with Trevor Caldwell?" The security guard frowned. "Who?" "Trevor Caldwell. He's a financial consultant here." The man shook his head. "I've been here 5 years. Never heard of him." My pulse pounded in my ears. I muttered a quick thank you and hurried out before he could ask more questions. That evening, I parked near the building again, determined to see where Trevor really went. At exactly 6 o'clock, his car pulled into the lot. He didn't rush inside like a man returning to work. He sat in the driver's seat, phone pressed to his ear, smiling, actually smiling the way he used to with me. Even from across the lot, I could see his gestures. He was animated, alive, laughing at something on the other end. After 20 minutes, he finally got out. But instead of entering the office, he walked straight into the coffee shop on the ground floor. He ordered a drink, sat in a corner, and opened his laptop. To anyone passing by, it looked like he was working. But I knew better. It was a performance. I followed him at a distance when he left, my heart thudding against my ribs. He tossed what looked like printed reports into the trash before getting into his car. Fake paperwork. Fake meetings. Fake job. As I pulled away behind him, one thought repeated over and over in my mind. The man I married is not who he says he is. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the receipt. Las Vegas. Red roses. A phone number I didn't recognize. My mind spun with questions. Who was he buying them for? Why lie about a conference? And why did the thought of him smiling in that car hurt more than his silence in our home? When Trevor finally stepped into the shower, steam filling the bathroom, I knew I had a narrow window. His phone sat charging on the nightstand. My hands shook as I picked it up. For weeks, I had memorized the way he tapped in his passcode. Our wedding date. I entered the numbers, my breath caught in my chest. The screen unlocked. My heart pounded as I scrolled. Message after message filled the screen, all to the same contact: Amanda. Missing you, baby. Can't wait to see you this weekend. This whole situation is almost over. I love you. Each word sliced through me like glass. My hands trembled as I opened the photos. Trevor and a woman I didn't recognize, standing close, arms wrapped around each other. Both of them wore rings. In one photo, they stood in front of what looked like a courthouse, smiling like newlyweds. The bathroom water kept running. I had minutes, maybe seconds. I forwarded everything, the texts, the photos, to my own phone. Then I placed his carefully back on the nightstand just as he had left it. I barely made it back to the bed before he stepped out, wrapped in a towel, humming. He looked relaxed. Happy even. For the first time in weeks, I saw the real smile he had hidden from me. And suddenly, I knew why. He wasn't just having an affair. He had another life. Another wife. I kept my face neutral, flipping through a magazine, forcing my hands to stay steady. I think I'll turn in early tonight, I said softly. Good idea, he replied, relief in his voice. Sweet dreams, Justine. Sweet dreams. The words nearly choked me. My marriage wasn't real. My husband was a liar, a fraud, and maybe even a criminal. The next morning, I drove downtown and sat in my car outside the office building. I had to see it with my own eyes. I had called the day before asking for Trevor Caldwell. The guard had looked confused. Nobody by that name works here, he told me. I've been here 5 years. So when Trevor's car pulled up that evening, I sank low in my seat. I watched him spend 20 minutes in his car, laughing and gesturing into his phone. He ended the call, walked into the building, but not into an office. He went straight to the coffee shop on the ground floor, ordered a drink, opened his laptop, and pretended to work. For an hour, I sat there watching him type, sip, and occasionally glance at his phone. To anyone else, he looked like a busy consultant. To me, it was theater. When he finally left, he tossed the papers into the trash, climbed into his car, and drove home like nothing was wrong. I followed at a safe distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Later that night, when he was asleep beside me, I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling. The man breathing steadily next to me wasn't my husband. He was a stranger, a liar, a bigamist. The morning after I uncovered Trevor's secret, I sat in my car gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The messages, the photos, the courthouse picture, it was all too much for me to carry alone. I needed help. Not a friend who would comfort me, but someone who could tell me exactly what I was dealing with. That's how I found myself on the 15th floor of a sleek glass building downtown, sitting across from Patricia Henley, a divorce attorney known for handling complicated cases. Her office smelled faintly of leather and fresh coffee. Diplomas lined the wall behind her, polished frames glinting under the sunlight. I laid my phone on her mahogany desk and showed her everything I had discovered. Patricia's brow furrowed as she scrolled through the photos. "Justine," she said, finally, her tone measured but serious. "This isn't just a marriage in trouble. What you're showing me could suggest bigamy. If Trevor is legally married to another woman, that's not only grounds for divorce, it's a felony." The word hit me like a blow. Bigamy. Felony. My throat tightened. "But we had a legal ceremony. We signed papers. There were over 200 witnesses." Patricia nodded. "That means your marriage is valid on your end. But if Trevor was already married, then he's committed a crime. A serious one. Bigamy in Colorado can carry up to 6 years in prison." I sat frozen, struggling to take it in. All along, I thought I was dealing with an unfaithful husband. Now I realized I might be married to a criminal. Patricia reached for her phone. "I recommend we bring in a private investigator immediately. We need to confirm Amanda's identity and whether her marriage to Trevor predates yours." By that afternoon, I was sitting in a different office, smaller, darker, filled with old case files and the faint hum of a desk fan. Detective Michael Torres, a former police officer turned private investigator, leaned back in his chair as I told him everything. His sharp eyes missed nothing. "I've seen cases like this before," he said, jotting notes in a worn leather notebook. "These men target women with resources. They court quickly, rush the marriage, avoid intimacy, and then set themselves up to access the money. The lack of physical contact is a red flag. It keeps emotions and evidence out of the way when they disappear." I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. "But he was so convincing. He talked about our future. He made me believe." Torres softened just slightly. "These people are manipulators. They study, you learn what you want, and then become that person. It's not your fault, Justine." He slid a small recording device across the desk. "Take this. Colorado is a one-party consent state. You can record any conversation you're part of. If Trevor slips, if he says something incriminating, we'll have it." I placed the device in my purse. Its weight heavier than it should have been. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was preparing for battle. That night, my hands trembled as I slipped the small recorder into the pocket of my cardigan. The device felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of my entire marriage. I didn't know what I was about to capture, but something inside me whispered, "This is the night." Dinner passed in silence. Trevor twirled pasta on his fork, pretending to listen as I talked about errands and phone calls with my sister. His eyes darted to his phone every few minutes, waiting. I recognized that look now, the anticipation, the way he leaned forward ever so slightly. He wasn't with me. He was waiting for her. After pushing food around his plate, he stood up. "I need to make a call," he said casually, like it was nothing. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Of course." I waited until he closed the office door, then crept down the hallway. The recorder hummed quietly in my pocket as I pressed myself against the wall. His voice carried through the thin wood. "I know, baby. I miss you too," Trevor said, his tone soft, tender, the way he never spoke to me anymore. My stomach twisted. "This whole situation is more complicated than I thought, but I promise it'll be over soon," he continued. A pause, then a chuckle. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing. She's actually making it easier. I think she's planning to file for divorce, which would solve all our problems." My pulse hammered in my ears. Divorce. Was that what he wanted all along? He kept talking. "Once the papers are signed, I can access the trust fund, transfer everything before she even realizes." The prenup was genius. She barely read it. If she divorces within the first year, she gets nothing. But I get half of whatever she brought into the marriage. That includes her grandmother's trust. The words slammed into me like a physical blow. The prenup. The one he insisted would protect us both. I had signed it out of love, out of trust. And now I realized it was designed to rob me blind. I pressed my back against the wall, gripping the recorder so tightly I thought I might crush it. "I love you, Amanda," he whispered next. His voice dropped lower, intimate. "Tell me about your day. How was work at the hospital?" He laughed softly at her response, murmured reassurances, asked about her coworkers, details he never bothered to ask me. For 10 minutes, I listened to my husband pour his heart out to another woman, treating her like she was his real partner, while I stood just outside the door, invisible. Finally, he ended the call with another "I love you." I stumbled back down the hallway before he could open the door. By the time he returned to the living room, I was curled on the couch with the television playing softly, pretending to be half asleep. He glanced at me, relief flickering across his face, as if the act was still intact. But I knew. I had the recording. And it was worse than anything I had ever imagined. Trevor hadn't just lied. He had orchestrated every detail: the romance, the wedding, the prenup. It wasn't about love, it was about money. About my grandmother's legacy. As I lay awake that night beside him, listening to his steady breathing, the fury inside me hardened into something else: resolve. He thought I was blind. He thought I was powerless. He thought he was going to win. He was wrong. By the next morning, fear had settled into something sharper: clarity. I wasn't just a wife fighting for answers anymore. I was a woman preparing to fight back. At Patricia's office, I replayed the recording for her and Detective Torres. Trevor's voice filled the room, calm and calculated, as he spoke about my trust fund like it was nothing more than a payday. Patricia's jaw tightened. Torres simply nodded, his eyes hard. "This is it," he said. "Intent. Fraud. Conspiracy. We've got him on tape." Patricia leaned forward. "But if we want to shut him down completely, we need to catch him in the act. That's the only way to protect you and ensure he can't wriggle out of this." Torres outlined the plan with military precision. "You're going to give him exactly what he wants. File for divorce. Make it look like you're heartbroken, ready to walk away. He'll think he's won. That's when he'll try to access the accounts. We'll be waiting." The idea terrified me. But it also lit a spark of something fierce inside me. If Trevor wanted to underestimate me, I'd let him. And then I'd watch his entire scheme collapse. That night, I served Trevor with divorce papers. My hands shook as I handed him the envelope, but I forced tears into my eyes, playing the part of the devastated wife. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered. "You've been so distant. I don't know how to fix us." For a moment, his mask almost slipped. I saw the flicker of triumph in his eyes before he smoothed it over with fake regret. He pulled me into an embrace that made my skin crawl. "I'm sorry it's come to this," he murmured. "Maybe time apart will help us figure out what we really want." The recorder hidden in my pocket captured every word. Over the next 2 days, Trevor acted lighter than he had in months. He hummed while making coffee, lingered over his phone with a smile, even left the house whistling. He believed the game was his to win. On the morning of the sting, Patricia filed the divorce paperwork downtown while Torres coordinated with federal agents. I sat in the courthouse, heart pounding, pretending to sign away my future, while in truth, we were setting the stage for Trevor's downfall. A text buzzed on my phone from Torres. "He's moving. First National Bank. Agents in place." I closed my eyes, taking a long breath. Trevor thought he was about to steal everything I had. He thought I was broken, defeated. He had no idea he was walking straight into a trap. When my phone lit up with the words "package delivered," I nearly collapsed with relief. Trevor had finally walked straight into the trap. The federal agents caught him at First National Bank, Amanda by his side. He had carried forged documents ready to open accounts in my name and drain what he thought would be his fortune. Instead, he left in handcuffs. 2 weeks later, I sat in a federal courtroom, the air heavy with tension. The polished wood benches creaked as people shifted, waiting for the judge. And then I saw him. Trevor shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists chained in front of him. The man who once stood in a tuxedo beside me now looked pale, exhausted, his confidence shattered. Amanda followed close behind her face, streaked with tears. She looked nothing like the glowing woman from the courthouse photo I had seen on his phone. She looked broken, clinging to the last scraps of denial. The prosecutor stood and read the charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and bigamy. The words echoed in the courtroom, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of Trevor's lies. Trevor's court-appointed attorney rose quickly. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence and requests bail consideration." The prosecutor countered without hesitation. "Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell is a clear flight risk. He has created false identities, opened fraudulent accounts, and attempted to siphon assets across state lines. The government strongly requests that he be held without bail." The judge adjusted his glasses, his expression stern. "Given the scope of the allegations and the evidence provided, bail is denied. Both defendants will remain in custody pending trial." Amanda buried her face in her hands. Trevor scanned the courtroom, his eyes frantic until they landed on me. For a fleeting second, our gazes locked. The recognition dawned in his face. I had known all along. The betrayal, the lies, the fraud I had uncovered, it exposed it, and now he would pay for it. Months later, the verdict came. Trevor Caldwell was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Amanda received 8 years for her role as an accomplice. Investigators revealed they had stolen nearly $2 million from women across 6 states. Victims began to come forward, emboldened by my case, reclaiming their stolen dignity along with their stolen funds. The newspapers called Trevor a marriage predator, his face splashed across headlines. The very charm he used to lure women became the image of his downfall. He would never be able to run the same scheme again. Sitting in the courtroom that day, I didn't feel triumph so much as release. The man I had loved, the man who whispered promises at our wedding, had been nothing but a mask. Justice had torn it away. The day Trevor was sentenced, I left the courthouse and stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in the thin Denver air. The sky stretched wide and blue above the city, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally fill my lungs without fear. It wasn't victory I felt. Not really. It was release. For so long, I had lived under the weight of his deception, questioning my worth, doubting my instincts, wondering if I was losing my mind. Now I knew the truth. I hadn't been wrong. My intuition had been screaming at me, and I had chosen to trust love over logic. That trust nearly cost me everything. The betrayal cut deep. But standing there, I realized something important. Trevor hadn't taken the best parts of me. He had only tried. What he didn't understand was that strength can be forged from heartbreak. That a woman who has been deceived doesn't stay broken. She rises. I began to rebuild quietly. Dinner with my sister, long walks in Washington Park where the autumn leaves crunched underfoot, phone calls with friends who reminded me I was loved. I went back to my grandmother's journal, the one she kept alongside the trust she left me. Her handwriting, steady and careful, spoke of resilience, of the importance of never letting someone else define your future. For a while, I carried shame. I wondered how I could have been so blind, how I let myself be manipulated. But the more I spoke to other women, the more I learned I wasn't alone. Con artists thrive on hope. They take advantage of kindness. They twist romance into a weapon. And none of that was my fault. Trevor and Amanda stole nearly $2 million from their victims. But what they couldn't steal was the ability of those women to come together, to share their stories, to fight back. In the aftermath, many of us connected strangers bound by the same deception. We weren't just victims. We became survivors. One evening, sitting with Emily over coffee, she squeezed my hand and said, "You could have let this destroy you. But instead, you turned it into strength. That's who you really are." Her words stayed with me. Because in the end, this story isn't only about betrayal. It's about reclaiming power. Trevor may have whispered, "From now on, it's just you and me." But the truth is, it was never us. It was always me, my courage, my resilience, my choice to rise when everything tried to break me.